Did you want to go to Reason Rally 2016 on June 4th and can't afford it? Do you want your group to be a part of the biggest atheist and free thought rally in 2016? Now's your chance. Reason Rally 2016 is looking for groups that want to come to the Reason Rally for a great rate. Reason Rally is working with rallybus.net, your online crowdsourced event bus sharing, to bring you to the Reason Rally and to take you home. Go to rallybus.net/reason-rally and sign up today. We need bus captains and organizers to set up groups of 40 or more that can meet up in major cities and ride share. Go to rallybus.net/reason-rally to set yours up today.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Havoc and Chaos Live. Weekly look at some of the batshittery we call news and the pals, pundits, and other after-wild people, myself included, claim to know what is really going on in our world. I am an atheist, a lesbian, and I have bipolar disorder, among other things. Therefore, hate of any kind is not welcome in my world. I am opinionated, and my impulse control went out the window months ago, so I say what I feel. In other words, stupid smart people piss me the fuck off. Be forewarned, I'm highly excitable, and if you're easily offended by four-letter words or longer, you may want to go and listen to something else. Before we begin, I'd like to say this. You can consider it a disclaimer of sorts, but also an explanation of why I do what I do. I am a layperson. I am not an expert. Never claimed to be. But there are subjects I spend more time learning about, for example, homosexuality in regards to the Bible, but I never consider myself an expert, even after 25 years of learning about the subject. I have an opinion, and hopefully it's an informative one. I consider vaccines and GMOs very good, and I'm not afraid to share that opinion, or the process I took to get to my reasoning point, hence the numerous citations. I do this for two reasons. To avoid a charge of plagiarism, a point that was drilled into me since high school, and the second reason is to provide those of you that actually read my shit a chance to read and hopefully learn from those that are smarter than I. So when I see information that runs counter to the consensus of science, I cringe. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I throw things. But it really fucks me off. So that's where today's episode falls. I have spent time reading Tocco's material, and I will forewarn you, I slaughtered the poor woman's name. And you know what? There's not a nary of credible citation available. Those articles with citation, it's the bare minimum of information. This bothers me, and it's something I try to combat in my own special way. So the other day, Kent the dinoman Hovind released a video entitled Dr. Kent Hovind Intro to Mary Tocco's Info on the Dangers of Vaccinations. Hovind, in my opinion, has basically officially added anti-vaxx to his repertoire. He has always been suspect in my mind due to his sovereign citizen anti-government mindset, but this video pretty much puts him over the edge. Within the first 2.5 minutes, Hovind demonstrates his imbecilic understanding of vaccines and immunology, and do remember that he was a high school biology teacher, while Tocco hits on two anti-vaccination tropes I want to discuss. The first being the Cutter incident, and the second being the alleged renaming of polio as non-viral meningitis and or bacterial meningitis as a reaction to the polio vaccine. So first we'll take a look at the Cutter incident. At first glance, this narrative looks pretty bad if one accepts Tocco's subtly implied version, as presented to Hovind, although that's really not what I found. Quote, in April 1955, more than 200,000 children in 5 western and midwestern U.S. states received a polio vaccine in which the process of inactivating the live virus proved to be defective. Within days, there were reports of paralysis, and within a month, the first mass vaccination program against polio had to be abandoned.
Subsequent investigations revealed that the vaccine, manufactured by a California-based family firm of Cutter Laboratories, had caused 40,000 cases of polio, leaving 200 children with varying degrees of paralysis and killing 10. End of quote.
Rightly so, the Cutter incident has been called one of the worst pharmaceutical disasters in U.S. history. Delving into court records and government reports and early accounts of the tragedy, Dr. Paul Offit, in his recent book, found that the vaccine was contaminated by live polio virus. It withstood the formaldehyde treatment that was designed to kill it, and the virus did survive by clinging to bits of cellular material that were not adequately filtered in Cutter's manufacturing process. It's what Offit called a scale-up problem. When initial batches of the vaccines were made in Johann Salk's laboratory, a very thick asbestos filter was used, and that efficiently separated the virus from the cellular debris. When Cutter attempted to produce the millions of doses required of the vaccine, it used a glass filter that was faster, but it let some of the virus-laden debris slip through. It was determined that 2 of the 8 batches of Cutter vaccine released to market, which was enough for 120,000 doses, were found to be subsequently contaminated with the live virus. And this was responsible for the statistics that I mentioned above. Based on just that real quick research, if you want to call it that, one finds that within 2 to 3 minutes, Tocco really has imbibed in her first set of hyperbole. What I found, as I mentioned above, there were between 200,000 to 400,000, depending on statistics, infected. 70,000 developed the muscle weakness. Of the 164 people who developed paralysis in response to the vaccine, 10 died. Though this is very, very tragic, and I'm not making light of it, the global end to polio transmission would have been inconceivable without the vaccine. Just think of the total number vaccinated in the U.S. alone. It's also important to remember that in the 1950s, protecting the public from polio was a national project. It was a national campaign, literally financed by the March of Dimes, that made it as such. Every effort was made to see that the vaccine would be widely available to all children, and that polio would be wiped out. In the U.S., the last case of naturally occurring polio happened in 1979, so that end was eventually reached. I'm not going to get into the politics or the minutiae of the development of the vaccine, or the GoFundMe vs. Cutter case, or its aftermath, but I will add this in regards to Offit's book regarding the GoFundMe case. Quote, "The relationship between science and the law has been complicated and often counterproductive." End of quote. The Cutter incident has had a huge impact on vaccine production. It's resulted in much higher production standards, and only 4 manufacturers survived. But there's zero evidence of the truth being hidden. It was slow, yes, but it was not hidden from the public. Mistakes were made. There is no denying that. The tragedy occurred, but one needs to bear in mind that the panic that polio caused. Over 40 million children at the time were slated to be immunized. To imply other motives is disingenuous at best. Quote, "Although it was not the most dreadful disease of its day, paralysis was rare and death very rare. It played upon the public imagination as a despoiler of youth, and of the summertime when it was most prevalent. Images here of very small children walking with leg braces and canes are still breathtakingly potent." Although I seem to be glossing over the Cutter incident, it doesn't lessen its overall impression. The impact of the first few minutes of Hovind's video, what Tocco suggests in her statement, left a mark. So much so that I've read a considerable amount concerning the development of said polio vaccine, the politics behind it, and other small details. I've actually gone so far as to order Paul Offit's book concerning the Cutter incident. But I don't get what she leaves us with, just in that short, brief span, where she basically is saying or implying that you cannot trust the power elite, i.e. the government, academia, the doctors, or scientists. But her 30-plus years at Google University, that's impeccable. And just a FYI here, I have been pondering Hovind's agenda as to this segment and recently learned that April is the 61st anniversary of the announcement by Johann Salk that the polio vaccine was safe and effective. Coincidence? I don't know. Hovind's mind works in very unusual ways. I was hoping to hit both points tonight in regard to Tocco's anti-vaxxer stance. Regretfully, my voice has had other ideas, and we really have already hit the 10-minute mark. Our guest tonight is too much fun to continue, so there will be a part 2 next week. I will leave you with a bit of foreshadowing, though. Hidden within Tocco's concern about the polio vaccine are a whole boatload of unsubstantiated claims. The most egregious to me is that vaccinations have no role in the eradication of disease. In her simplistic denial of germ theory, she states that polio was renamed as non-viral meningitis and or bacterial meningitis as a reaction to the polio vaccine. Both her concerns are false. I hope to show why. What it really boils down to in a simplistic way, if the names, polio is not the only ailment included in this list, have been changed, why don't we see a corresponding increase in other ailments? You hear this a lot with autism. That it spiked in the 80s. Most people today would not be considered autistic back in the 80s. Most people in the 80s would be diagnosed as something else. What changed, or one issue that changed, was the diagnostic criteria. It was tightened up, definitionally wise, but broadened to include a bigger spectrum. That's why we hear the term autism spectrum disorder. It's not that there's more cases of autism, more people are being included in that diagnosis. If you have 10 minutes to spare, and I hope you do, give a listen to this garbage that both Hovind and Tocco spew. Although I'm fairly certain I'm talking to the choir, it should give you a finer understanding of why combating the moon is so important, and why people like our guest, Professor Stephen, are so important. It's the little things that matter. One person's mind is changed by what Professor Stephen does, what I attempt to do in my own little way, and I've done my job. Now, back to the show and Professor Stephen Valu.